Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're taking a look at a bunch of games from an anime series, and the one I'm doing for today is on Sailor Moon. In fact, I have done a Sailor Moon video game video before where I talked about the ones on the Super Famicom, but today I'm taking a look at the handheld ones. So I really don't think I really need to explain what Sailor Moon is, since I'm sure most of you at least know what it is. Even if you've never seen it, I'm sure you are at least aware of its existence back in the day. But if you must know, it was a series that I did grow up watching. In fact, it was probably the first anime I recall ever seeing, and the reason why I watched it back then was because my sister was a year older than me and she got to pick what shows we watch most of the time. And yeah, as a kid I loved it, but anyways, that was just a simple recap that I can tell you all with that. But anyways, let's just get right to it and talk about the first game. So the first one I'm doing for today is on the Game Boy, and it is Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon R. And with the name like that, you know it's based after the second season. And it was developed and published by Angel Studios and was released in 1994. But here's an odd thing that I will get out of the way first, is that there's actually two Sailor Moon games on the Game Boy, but I'm only taking a look at one, and the reason why I decided to pick this one was because I actually found this game was actually easier to see most of the game, even though the other one is actually fan translated, which is kind of weird. And I'll explain that in a moment, but the first thing I do want to say about this game is that it is indeed an action platformer, but it also does have a sort of adventure mode sort of thing. So you have three different options to pick from. You got story mode, arcade mode, and then mini games. So story mode is the main campaign of the game, where you actually start off by walking around in a town, talking to people, and having to do certain things, and then of course eventually you get to go to the action platforming stage, and then fight a boss, and then go back to the overworld thing. And I have to admit, I do think it is pretty interesting that this game even has a mode like this. And then you have arcade mode, which could also be summed up as no bullshit exposition mode, because it's literally all the action platforming stages and the boss stages without the open world and the cutscenes or anything like that. So because of that, I actually found this game was a lot easier to play through. Because the other Game Boy game doesn't have that, so you're forced to play through the story mode and having to talk to random people and do a bunch of tedious shit. So that's the reason why I'm taking a look at this one instead, but maybe some other time I might be in the mood to do the other one, but yeah, right now I just don't feel like doing all that. So yeah, for me personally, I think arcade mode is the way to play this game if you really wanted to. And then the mini games in this game, there's a couple of them. You got the Sailor V game, which is like a side-scrolling shoot 'em up, but only that you move in one spot, and as soon as an enemy passes by you, then you take damage. Yeah, even if they pass over your head, you still lose damage, and then you die. Yeah, it's very simple shit. And then you got a slide puzzle, of course, and then there's a matching game, there's also a high and low game, so it's kind of like the game War, almost, and then you got a stupid quiz, and then a fortune-telling thing, which is kind of pointless. So yeah, the mini-games are pretty uneventful. So let's just get talking about the arcade mode. So like I said, it's a side-scrolling action platformer, where you just gotta get from one end to the next end, and then you gotta fight a boss at the end and kick his ass. And I should also mention that in the arcade mode, you can actually pick any character to play through the game with. Where in the story mode, you have to play as a certain character on a certain stage. And as you would expect, all you do is you jump and attack. And there's many items you can pick up, such as ones that gain your health, or the tiara, which powers you up a bit, and of course, the most important part, the ones that give you points. Because everyone knows that points in old retro games matter. Actually, they don't. But yeah, it's very simplistic stuff. And as for the story mode, well, like I said, you just get to go to a hub world and you gotta do a whole bunch of shit before you can actually get to some of these stages. And as interesting as the idea is, though, unfortunately, I just think it's just really boring, really tedious, and just not a lot of fun. But one good thing that I will give it credit for is that compared to the other Game Boy game that I played a little bit of, this one at least has a map, where the other one did not. So now, let's get moving on and start talking about the game's controls. And the controls in this game are decent, they're fine. And I don't think I need to go over the button layout, but pretty much, the walking in this game feels okay, the jumping feels fine, a little bit floaty, but it's not bad. The attacking does feel a little stiff, but it's not too bad. But probably the biggest complaint I have with this game would have to be the fact that your sprite is really huge and sometimes it can be really hard to like get out of the way of certain attacks. So I think it would have been better if your character sprite was a little bit smaller. But yeah, there's really not much to say here because the controls in this game, they're not bad, but they're also not really great either, and also it's just a really bare bones game in general. So let's get moving on and start talking about the game's graphics. And graphically, for 1994 for Game Boy standards, I do think they are pretty good. So there is some nice backgrounds here and there. I do find that the sprite work on the enemies are good, and hell, even the ones on your character are actually good looking too. It's just, you know, other than the fact that they're a bit too big, but aside from that, I actually do think they are nicely detailed. And the city that you walk through in the story mode also does look good too, even though it does remind me a lot of Mario's Missing. But yeah, for Game Boy standards, I would say this is a pretty good looking game. I mean, at least everything is recognizable. And it doesn't have any textures that just look all like muddy and ugly. And now, as for the game's music, surprisingly, I actually think the music in this game is pretty good. So firstly, on the title screen, it actually does have the Sailor Moon theme, and it actually does sound really good in 8-bit. And the music throughout some of the stages are pretty nice, upbeat, and also some of them are a little bit catchy, but probably one of my favorite songs in the game would probably have to be the one that plays during the castle stage. It kind of reminds me of something from like the Wonder Boy games. And with that said about the music, I will say, it's nothing like super iconic and maybe it's not the most memorable ever, but I do think it actually was a lot better than I was expecting it to be. I was expecting it to just be, you know, kind of mediocre and whatever, but no, I would actually say it's pretty solid for a Game Boy. And for some reason, I actually do really like a lot of Game Boy music. I don't know why, it just has a very different vibe compared to like NES to me. So now, if you want to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, if the prices are still accurate as of now, they'll probably change by the time when this video is uploaded, but anyways, so the cheapest I've seen it for a loose cart was $16, and the highest I've seen it for a complete in box was $38. So it's not stupidly overpriced, but, you know, I guess it's a little bit more expensive than other Game Boy games that you would normally see, but I guess it's not the most common ever. So now, as my overall thoughts on Sailor Moon R on the Game Boy is that, well, it's a very average game, and I mean very average, and it's not hard to see why. But knowing that though, it's not a terrible game because, you know, the game is very playable, and of course, it's not like super bullshit or anything, except for the story mode. I will say that's probably the most bullshit part about it because it's just so like overly long and tedious. But at least they do give you the option to just skip all that and just go right to the game itself, and that's something I will give it credit for, is that it at least knows that, you know, if you don't want to go through all that shit, you can just play it like that. But are the action platforming parts fun though? Well, meh, it's okay. I mean, like I said, it's not terrible, but it's just nothing that's really stands out at being really that good. It's very basic, and like I said, the sprite is a bit too big, and the attacking is a little bit slow, but it's not, like, the worst ever. And the level design starts out from being really boring, but then eventually gets okay at best. And another thing I should mention too is that the game, if you just play through the arcade mode, is like super short, but I can't really complain about that because obviously most Game Boy games were pretty short. But I figured it's worth mentioning that I actually did beat this game in like just under 20 minutes. Like that's how short the game was. Also, the game is like really easy too. Like I think I only died like 2 times or something. And one of those times I fell into a pitfall and the other time was at a boss fight near the end of the game. So if you're a huge Sailor Moon fan and you also want a game that's like really easy and short, then, well, I guess this would be a game for you. But if not, then yeah, it's just a very average game at best. So overall, it's playable, but nothing remarkable. Alrighty, so moving on to the next game, and the next one we're taking a look at is on the Gamegear, and that's Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon S. And the game was developed by Shimada Kaku. I have no idea how to pronounce this, but basically it's the same company that made Felix the Cat on NES. And it was published by Bandai, and it was released in 1995. And this one is very similar to the Game Boy game, but just only that, you know, it's on the Gamegear, but the levels are actually pretty different though. Also, there is no, like, adventure aspect of it. It's literally just a level-to-level action platformer, but only in this one you can only select 2 characters, being the main one, Sailor Moon, and Chibi Moon. So the concept of how to play it is pretty much the same, so I'm not going to go all over that again, but there is one thing that is very different though, is that there's actually a lot more attacks that you can do in this game. So when you attack, you just do the punch punch kick, right? Well, sometimes if you get too close to the enemy and attack, you can actually do a grapple move. And if you hold down the attack button and charge, it'll actually use a projectile move. You know, the Sailor Boomerang thing, I forget exactly what they call it, but you know the one. But if you picked up a wand that you can find throughout the level and then you hold it down long enough, you can actually do a special attack, but of course it uses up wands. So that's pretty much all the major differences here, at least for the main game, but as for the mini games though, well, they're actually pretty different in this one. So they brought back the matching game, but instead it's actually a wheel where you have to try to get it to the correct one. And then you got a mini game that looks like elevator action where you gotta find tuxedo masks behind one of these doors. And if you get it wrong, then it'll give you a hint, and you only have a certain amount of chances. And then they got a stupid quiz game again, but only that at least this one actually has an English translation now, so it's at least playable. But then probably the weirdest one they have here is Luna P-Ball's Picnic. Wow, what a title. So what is this, a minigame where you get to play with the cat's balls? Well, yes and no. Well, yes in the fact that you get to control a giant ball of Luna and you have to try to balance it between the two cats. And if you touch one of the cats as the ball, then you lose. And of course, this minigame is a lot harder than it looks. So yeah, just like the other game, this game's minigames are lame as shit. So now let's get moving on to the game's controls, and the controls for this game are also very similar to the Game Boy game where it's playable, but it does have its weird issues here and there. So the jumping in this game feels a bit more floatier in this one compared to the other game, and the walking speed is a bit more slower paced this time around, although it's not slow at responding, it's just a slower speed type of game. And the attacking feels pretty okay, but like I said, at least in this one there's a bit more variety with attacks. But it's still a very basic platformer, but I guess not as basic though. But one thing that I was surprised that was better about this one is that while the sprite in this game is pretty big, I actually find that it doesn't get in the way as much. I don't know exactly how it works, maybe it's just like the screen size of like the Gamegear makes it a little bit more manageable with bigger sprites, but I don't know. But either way, I do welcome this. So now let's get moving on to the game's graphics. And the graphics in this game I think are actually really good for Game Gear standards. So not only is the game really bright and colorful, which suits the game, but I also really do like the sprite work in this game. Not only is it big and it actually doesn't get in the way of the gameplay aspect, but also I think it actually animates really nice. I actually really like the walk cycle that Sailor Moon does. And some of the levels that you go to are pretty different compared to the one in the Game Boy game, and I actually think they look pretty good. And the enemy sprites in this one are alright. I mean, they look good, but they're just not really the most memorable ever. But there is one enemy that's just so stupid looking. It looks like a tire with like a face on it. Like, who the fuck comes up with this shit? Like, was this in the show? Well, I don't remember it. But the screens that show up in between levels, though, I do think those look really good as well. So if I say so myself, I'd say that the graphics in this one are actually really good for what it is. So now, as for the game's music, the music in this one is, well, yeah, exactly what I expected. Just decent and alright, just kinda there. But it's not bad though. Like, there's no song in this game that's like annoying as hell or anything, so that's good. But yeah, like I said, it's just nothing that's super memorable. Although the song that plays during the sewage stage at the end of the game though, I actually do think that one's probably the best one. But the rest of the music though is just kinda alright. It's there, it exists. But yeah, definitely the Game Boy game's music is a lot better overall. Alright, so now, if you want to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, I only seen 3 copies, only one loose that was going for $30, and the 2 complete in box ones were going for $35 and $50. So this one does seem to be much more uncommon compared to the Game Boy game, and it's also a bit more expensive too, but it's not stupidly overpriced, but definitely a lot more than I would pay for a used Game Gear game, because everyone knows that collecting Game Gear is kind of an odd thing due to the fact that the hardware is not really the most prominent. So what would you do? Buy Sailor Moon on the Game Gear, or buy yourself a pack of beer? Well, I think I'll take the beer. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Sailor Moon on the Game Gear is that, well, it's pretty much just like the Game Boy game in the sense that it's just a very average game that is not bad, but also not anything great. And it's pretty difficult to figure out which one I even like better than the other, because they both have certain things that I like a little bit better than each other, but at the same time, they're also both very average games. But in a strange way, I do kinda like the Gamegear game just a smidge more. It's still average as hell, but I think I like it a smidge more because not only is there more levels in the game, but also I found this game was a bit more challenging. Although the game is still really easy, but I would say that it's more challenging than the Game Boy game was, where that one, I kinda just like beat it without even trying. This one actually took me a bit more effort. And I like the fact that the game was just a straight up platformer. There was no like adventure mode where you like tediously had to like do a bunch of shit just to get to the main levels, which is what you really wanted to do. So for that reason, I would say that the Gamegear game is like a bit better, but it still wouldn't be a game I'd recommend to most people unless, like I said before, you're like a hardcore fan of Sailor Moon, you have to play everything that's Sailor Moon related. So yeah, not much needed to say here, but I think we can all agree that the mini-games in both the Game Boy and the Gamegear games are both shit. Alright, so now we're moving on to the final game in this video, and it seems like that all the Sailor Moon games I've been looking at today have been very middle of the road. Yeah, compared to the Super Nintendo games that I've looked at before, it's extremely mild. So let's see if this next one will be better, and that happens to be Sailor Moon: The Moon Shines on the DS, and this one was only released in Italy. Yeah, not even Japan got this apparently. So the game was published by Bandai Namco, and it was developed by Open Sesame, and in case you're wondering, that was the same company that made that Metal Gun Slinger game on the GBA, which is pretty cool. And it came out in the year 2011. And it is yet again an action platformer, but I would say more accurately, it's more like a puzzle platformer. And yes, despite the fact that it's only in Italian language, it's actually pretty playable to play. And believe it or not, I actually know a little bit about the story. So it's all about the Sailor Scouts trying to help out their friend Nina, who falls asleep into a coma and she can't wake up because the dreams that she's having are being infected by Lord Casper. So yeah, if you think about it, this story is basically Sailor Moon meets Inception meets Paprika meets Nightmare on Elm Street, and that sounds pretty fucking batshit. Yeah, I'm sure I'm making this story sounding a lot more awesome than it needs to be, but I don't know, I kinda like the concept of it. So when the game starts, you get to play as your favorite Sailor Scout, and whichever one you pick will start off in a different location on the map. And the main objective is that you gotta collect all 10 crystals on the map, and it's all done in like a maze-like fashion similar to a Metroidvania, so whenever you go down on the map. And every area in the game usually consists of having block puzzles where you gotta move a block into a certain way in order to get a certain leverage, or you gotta put it over a waterfall that blocks your view. Yeah, one thing that is kinda stupid about this game is that apparently none of the Sailor Scouts can swim. I'm pretty sure they were able to in the show, but apparently in here, no, they just fucking die. But I don't know, maybe the water in this like dream world has so much pressure that as soon as like your face goes under it, then it fills your lungs like immediately and then you just die. And now that I think about it, that sounds pretty terrifying. But all realism aside though, yeah, it's one of those platformers where you gotta mostly focus on doing puzzles where, like I said, you gotta like put blocks in certain areas, you also have to get through certain gates with certain characters to get through, and there are enemies to avoid, and most of them look pretty harmless, so I don't know, maybe this like cute little like ladybug is like vicious as hell. So in a way, this game does sort of remind me of the Mary-Kate and Ashley games on the Game Boy Color. I believe it was called Get a Clue or something. Well, yeah, this game is basically like that, but, you know, with Sailor Moon related content. Now you're probably wondering, well, does this game have any minigames at all, since all the other ones do? Well, not really, although there is one side content, but I wouldn't classify it as a minigame per se. Instead, it's like an art tool where you get to make your own backgrounds and put stamps all over it, and as you get further through the game, then you can get more stamps and backgrounds. So pretty much, this mode is like a poor man's Mario Paint. So alright, now let's get moving on to the game's controls, and I think the controls in this game, they do work pretty well for what it is. So just like the other games, all you do is you walk around and you jump and attack. Although you can't jump while in thin air though, instead you can only attack when you're on the ground, which is a little unfortunate, but you can kill them by jumping on their heads, so I guess that works out. So it is yet another basic ass platformer, but do the controls at least feel good? I'd say for a puzzle platformer like this, I think that the controls feel good for that, because, you know, most puzzle platformers like this usually are a little bit more on the slower side, and this one does feel bit more slower when it comes to the movement, but I don't mean slow as in unresponsive, I just mean like the speed of the game, so kind of similar to the Gamegear game. But I would say that it does feel better than that one though. So if you're used to playing puzzle platformers like this, I don't think this one feels that much different. So I'd say for the style of gameplay that it is, I think the controls are pretty good for that. But let's just say if this was like some high energy, like break your face type of game, then well, yeah, obviously the controls would be a pretty big letdown for that. But for a slower paced game like this, I think it works fine. Alright, so now let's get moving on to the other things, like the graphics. And graphically, I think this game looks decent. I mean, the game is very bright and colorful, as you would expect a Sailor Moon game to be, so that's good. And I really do like the sprite work on the main characters and the enemies, I think those are really nicely done. The pictures and the cutscene graphics are good, like they actually look recognizable like the show. But as for the stage backgrounds though, I mean, it's not bad looking, but I feel like they're a little bit too stock. Yeah, it almost looks like something that you could just find by typing in rainbow background on Google Images or something. But aside from that, yeah, I would say it's a decent looking game. I mean, it's nothing like cutting edge for the DS, but you know, I think it looks good for the style of the game that it's supposed to be. And now, as for the game's music, the music in this one, I think is probably the worst out of the games in this video, because the music is just very boring sounding. It's not really good. Like, the music does fit with the setting of the game, but the reason why it sounds boring is that, well, it's just really repetitive, it's super forgettable. In fact, I don't even remember what the fuck it sounds like right now, but I just remember that when I was playing this game with the volume on, I just felt like I was about to go to sleep. So sadly, the music in this game is just really not that good. I mean, it's not annoying or anything, but it's just so underwhelming. And now, if you wanted to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, well, good luck, because I only found one copy, and it was card only, and it was going for $60. Yeah, $60 for a loose DS game? Yeah, I'm good, thanks. But I guess the plus side to this is that at least the DS is region free, thank God, but, you know, I feel like there's just many other DS games that you can get that from other regions that are a lot cheaper, though. So with that being said, my overall thoughts on the Sailor Moon game on the DS is that, surprisingly, I do somewhat like this game. I mean, it's nothing like amazing, it's not mind-blowing, but it's also not bad either. But I would say that this game is above average, so meaning that I actually would say that I do like it better than the other two games I've looked at in this video. Not by like a whole lot, but by enough to say that I would say that I like it enough. Because I do feel that this game does meet its goals better than the other games do. For that, like, I feel like that the controls for this game actually make sense with the gameplay style, where with the action platformers, I feel like the controls like could have been a whole lot better. And also, every once in a while, I actually do like puzzle platformers. I mean, they're not the type of games that I can play all the time, but you know, every once in a while, I think they're fine. But even as a puzzle platformer based after an anime though, I would say that it's decent at best. But yeah, compared to like other ones like the Loop on the Third game on the SNES, and then there's also the Violinist of Hamelin on SNES, I think those two are definitely some really good puzzle platformers based after animes. This one, yeah, I don't think it's as good as those two, but I still think that it's an alright game. But is it worth paying like $60 for a loose cart? Fuck no. Unless you're like a collector of everything that's Sailor Moon related, but you know, that's on you though. But yeah, the game's alright, but of course, it's not one I can easily recommend since, you know, I can see a lot of people writing off this game as just being boring as shit. And you wouldn't be wrong, I mean, the game is not the most exciting thing ever. But if you are in the mood for a puzzle platformer though, I do think it's a decent one at best. Like I said, there are other ones that I would recommend more so than this one if we're talking about ones based after animes, but even if this one has its own though, I still think it's alright. So that takes care of 3 Sailor Moon games that you can play on the go. And yeah, I can see a lot of people saying like, well, this video was a waste of time, none of them are great. And yeah, it is unfortunate that none of them are great, but you know, at least I got something out of it. And I feel like these games could have been like a bajillion times worse, trust me. I played some pretty shit-tastic games in my time, and these ones are definitely not shit-tastic compared to the other shit that I've played. But I'd still say that my favorite Sailor Moon game would have to be the fighting game on the Super Famicom. That one I just think is a hell of a lot of fun, and that's probably the one I could recommend to most people. At least out of the ones that I reviewed before, but I guess I should also mention that the Sailor Moon arcade game that is a beat 'em up, that one's also pretty damn great as well. So that's all I gotta say for this one. So if you're a Sailor Moon fan, then you maybe might be interested in these games, but if not, then I don't know how the hell you made it to this part of the video unless you really are that much of a trooper. So anyways, with that said, thanks for watching, commenting, and have yourselves a great day.